unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
Art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Art Pod. My guest today is Nathalie Herschdorfer, and she is the director at the Photo Elysée in Lausanne, in Switzerland. So welcome. It's so great to have you.
Thank you.
So I want to tell everybody a little bit about Nathalie before we start. Let me just check this. So Nathalie Herschdorfer is a curator and art historian specializing in the history of photography. She's the director of the Museum Photo Elysée, the Photography Museum in Lausanne, Switzerland. Before that, as director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Le Locle, she organized important shows featuring the work of Henry Cartier-Bresson, Stanley Kubrick, Vic Muniz, Alex Prager, Vivian Sasson, Hiroshi Sugimoto, and Andy Warhol, amongst others. She's an active voice in contemporary photography and has been invited to organize numerous exhibitions outside Switzerland. She teaches the history of photography at the Lausanne University of Art and Design and is the author of several books, including Man Ray, Liberating Photography, Deborah Tuberville, Photo Collage, 160 Years of Photography from the Collections of the Red Cross, Body, the Photography Book, Mountains by Magnum Photographers, The Thames and Hudson Dictionary of Photography, Coming into Fashion, A Century of Photography at Condé Nast, and Afterwards, Contemporary Photography Confronting the Past. That is a lot. You're a very busy woman. So I wanted to start this interview and talk a little bit about your role as the director at the Photo Elysée, sort of the kind of mission the museum has, and then your responsibilities.
So the Photo Elysée is, I would say, one of the largest institutions dedicated to photography. So we are a state museum. The museum was founded almost 40 years ago. So in Europe in the 80s, it was quite new to have photography museums. And we have a focus on photography, but I would say everything in photography. It's not just Swiss photography, or it's not just landscape photography. We cover the entire history of photography. It's also very international. And our collection is about 1 million objects, because photography, of course, it's not just prints, collection prints, but it is also plates, negatives, contact sheets, books. We have many books because photography books are very important in the field, magazines, albums, and so on. So the museum, being a state museum, which is very important, is now in a new building. The museum was previously in an old house, 18th century house, beautiful house on Lake Geneva. And we just moved 2 years ago to a brand new art district with a new museum. And now we work together with two other museums. It's a design museum and the Museum of Fine Arts. The three museums are under the same organization in the same location. It's two buildings for three museums. And we really have to work together. So the new art district is called Platform 10. And my job is also to make sure that visitors, people from the region, but also international, understand that in Lausanne, Switzerland, there is now a new art district where you can spend many hours just in this place. Because three museums, it's altogether, I would say, 15 shows that you can pick.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's really massive, and we also have sometimes, performances. There are two restaurants there, so this is really a place where there's a lot to do, but it's completely new because it didn't exist before. So it's also for us as directors for the 3 museums, the 3 directors and our executive director, we really have to make sure that this is a kind of place where people think that they can go just have a drink, eventually visit an exhibition, and if they buy a ticket, they may come back or visit another museum. So we try to really now work on the communication. So everything is under construction. We have to really invent things, and still we have 3 teams, 3 museums. So we still have the daily business, each museum, but we also always have to think together. So education team, communication team, technical team, administrative teams. We have a kind of double life, all of us, which is our museum and Platform 10 as an art district.
That's incredible. I've never been to Lausanne, so it's great to hear, because now for the future, I know to plan like a whole day excursion, since there's so much to see. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about, as director, can you talk a little bit about the upcoming programming at Photo Elysée, and kind of, do you have your hand in every department? Do you work from the communications department to the curatorial one? How do you go about selecting the programming?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is exactly how I conceive myself. I think my strength is in curating. This is really my main interest. Of course, being the director of a museum is also management. And the team of Photo Elysée is about 35 people. And it doesn't include, the people working in the museum, like security, reception, cafe, and all that. So it's really the people we have. Various departments like communication, education, administration, obviously technical also, and exhibition. And of course, as a director, my role is to program. I have to work also with the 2 other directors, because we try to really think together as well, even though you can go and visit just one museum, and then because we are the photography museum, you can just, have you also a couple of hours just in our museum. And right now we just opened, it's really, it was open end of March. We just opened a new program dedicated to surrealism. And the 3 museums decided to focus on surrealism because 2024 is the centennial of surrealism. It was founded by André Breton in 1924, and we wanted to just celebrate this 100 years of surrealism. So it means that we had to think in terms of programming what we can do in each museum. So the Museum of Fine Arts, it's kind of evidence that okay, there are painters like Salvador Dali or Marcel Duchamp works, and so they have a big show with surrealist artists. And I was thinking, what can we bring in photography? And my background is in history of photography, so of course I had to really think, who are the artists that we can consider being part of surrealism in photography. And the first name was Man Ray. So we just opened this Man Ray exhibition. I would say that Man Ray is not just a surrealist artist, is much more than that. He's much more than that. But then I curated that show from a private collection. This is a collection that is in private hands, and I guess one of the largest private collection dedicated to Man Ray. So it was a joy for me as a curator, and that's really what my passion is, to really dig in a collection and be able to make a selection of works for the visitors. But then at the same time, we have to think also okay, we have one element, surrealism, Man Ray, a big name. People may recognize that name. I always say Man Ray is like kind of Picasso of photography, because he's a name that people kind of recognize. But we have other shows as well in our space. So I decided to invite Cindy Sherman, major artist, of course, in contemporary art, with her latest series, latest portraits, the work that was just launched recently, last year, 2023. And I'm very proud that we are able to be the first museum in the world to show this series. So it's a series that together is 30 portraits. We have on view about 15. They are quite large, size. And for me, it was interesting to bring Cindy Sherman. That's how I conceive programming, is to try to make link also together in our program. In Man Ray, there are many, many portraits. He photographs almost everyone in Paris in the 1920s, 1930s, and the show also include all these portraits of all these people. And Cindy Sherman is also a work about portraiture. It's always her body, her face. It's not self-portraits, but there's a lot of, it's a play also. She plays different roles. And I was thinking that in surrealism, there's also this kind of, other world. It's not documentary photography.
Right.
They don't try to document reality, but they bring us in a kind of, other world, emotional world as well. And the portraits of Cindy Sherman, for me, were very interesting in this context because it's very contemporary. She addresses questions related to our world today, social media and the selfie, and that everyone tries to have, the best face for social media. And I mean, it's a very relevant work, but I was thinking she plays also. She has a lot of fun also making her portraits. And that's my link to surrealism. So the way I conceive the program is always to show artists that comes from different perspectives, different generations. Sometimes it's national, regional, and international. I always try to mix. But for me, in my mind, as a curator, I know why I have the people, together, or how I conceive a thematic program. Sometimes it's not necessarily evident for visitors, but in my mind, there's a kind of thread between shows, and I try to also open the program to get interest from a kind of large group of visitors. Some people may come just for Cindy Sherman. Right. She's a very well known name in contemporary art, and other people will not have any interest in her work because it's much too contemporary. Yes, and it's a bit difficult also because the work are not so easy, are fun, but she addresses really important questions. So some people may be a little bit repulsive, in terms of these works. And some people will just come because they love Man Ray, and it's historical, it's big name, and so in that sense it's quite interesting to mix. And beyond that, I have other two shows with very, very young artists. It's emerging artists coming from art schools. And that's also for me a way to bring, a new generation. And these artists really work in a very different way. They are I guess most of them are 25, 30 years old. So it's a completely different generation again. And one of the show is the art school in Lausanne, ECAL. I work with this art and design school a lot. And there was a workshop initiated last year with Christian Markley, very important artist. Also, I invited Christian Markley to do this workshop at this school, and they work from our collection. And we have because we have this photography collection, and we have a collection of photo booth, images.
Yes.
These strips. Because we have a photo booth in the museum where visitors can just, you put money and you have your strip with 4 portraits.
That's very interactive.
Pre-digital, it's an old machine. And in the collection, we have thousands of these portraits that made by guests who came to the museum, and we asked them if they agreed to leave that for the collection. So Christian Markley was invited by the museum, or he had this idea a couple of years ago when he was digging in our collection to do a work with these photo booth images. And then when he mentioned that, because it was a kind of commission for our collection, I told him, well, that may be interesting to, while you are working on this a project, to also give a workshop and see what it means for younger generation, this idea of the photo booth, pre-digital photo booth, and how they would react to this material. And so one of our exhibitions also today is these works. And what is interesting for me, there's another link with surrealism, is if you look at André Breton and his friends and the surrealist artists, they play a lot with photo booth, because photo booth was invited exactly 100 years ago.
Wow. I didn't know
the
that.
machine.
Yes.
So of course we all know this machine for IDs.
Yes.
We need to go there, and it's not fun, and we have to be very serious. But surrealist artists went at that time in the late 1920s. They had lots of fun playing in photo booths. They went with friends, and this is the kind of game where you go and you pose and you bring tons of people in the little space, and that was my link. I was thinking, okay, they play with the photo booth, surrealist artists. So then we have this kind of link, and it is a machine that was invented 100 years ago. So that's the link of playing today with photo booth. So that's the little links I try. But of course, people go to that exhibition and they may not know about this link with surrealist. I don't. It's you don't need to know that link. But in my mind, as a curator, I have these little things.
Yeah, it speaks to each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. So now you're the director of this museum, but you're also a curator as well. And I know that you have a lot of shows coming up that you've curated. Obviously, the Man Ray at Photo Elysée. You have a show called Beyond Fashion that's launching at Saatchi Gallery at the end of May. Also the show on Deborah Tuberville, which is in Amsterdam and will travel to London in the fall. And then you're also working on a show on sports and photography in the summer in Aarhus. So how do you balance the work of being the director of this museum and doing all these other curatorial endeavors?
It's a very good question, and kind of difficult things, because of course I love my job and I have this passion for digging into photography, into art. I'm an art historian, but my specialty is really photography, and I love being in contact with artists or digging into archives. It's also something amazing. And I curated several shows that is not linked directly to contemporary living artists, but really digging into archives, and I that's also why I have books, and this part of my life, curating, I want to keep it, because that's why I'm there. But you are right, managing a museum, this is a kind of complete different job. And I guess my team sometimes a little bit worried about, these other projects that needs also my attention, being a curator, because a museum is really about, I have to take this distance about just the projects. And this is many different aspects. It's how do we finance the projects? How do we communicate about them? What kind of visitors do we want? How we can work on our name outside Switzerland and being known for people who never visited the museum. So communication, but it's also education. What kind of program? What do we want to bring to people? So of course I have teams working on these things, but we have all this back and forth constantly because in a way, being the director of the museum, it's also trying to have a vision and an artistic line. And for me, I conceive my role is also writing some, a kind of history for the museum for my years about a focus in photography, a focus as a museum, focus as what a museum is today for society, what we can bring that our phones don't bring, or all the screens they don't bring. So it's building a vision, and of course this is something also quite close to the work as a curator, because it's what kind of art do you want to bring? What kind of art do you want to put on view? What kind of artists do you want to? Because there are so many possibilities. But then the different departments, education, communication, and all that, even technical, they have then to adapt and work to how we show that. There's a lot of interactions about what we try to say to the visitors or to our, the outside world. And it's true that because we have many different programs, sometimes I have these, back and forth discussion about, but we cannot communicate about everything. We cannot have programs or educational program for all the shows. So what are the main thread? And also what is our role as a photography museum today? Does it make still sense to have a photography museum just dedicated to one medium? What is photography today, with moving images or digital media? And also, what is our role in this context of the Platform 10 with working with 2 other museums? So in that sense, that's also what I have to bring as a director, together with this daily job of, managing the museum and, every single project, there are, deadlines and planification. And also what I didn't mention is our museum, and this is something for me quite important. You said that we have an exhibition right now in Amsterdam, this on Deborah Turbeville. This exhibition, I curated this exhibition, was first in Lausanne. It is now in Amsterdam at Swiss Marseille, and it will go to London, Vienna, and I'm really working on the traveling exhibition. And for me, travel shows is also important because it's produced by our museum, but still it is a way for us to reach other audiences. Yes. But it's a work to do to make sure that the show can travel, to make sure that people know in the field, my colleagues everywhere in the world know that this is available. Then there are a lot of, discussion about feasibility, cost. And then when you build a tour, you have to think also geographically how it works, because sometimes you want to make sure that it follows and you have dates coming one after the others. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily work for the other museums, because sometimes you have a hall and then you have storage, or the museum that could bring you exhibition is maybe in Japan and the show is touring in Europe. So how do you manage that? Do you do these transports? So then suddenly you realize, thinking today about sustainability, does it make sense to travel shows all over the world? And all these questions are also part of, what you have to consider. So in that sense, it's a job that is really kind of very wide perspective, sometimes very administrative work, and sometimes it's really working on the content of art and having this dialogue with artists. So it's really large, and I'm here in New York because in New York there's now APAD, this photography fair, where I meet many colleagues, I meet galleries, I meet artists, I meet other curators from museums, and this is a time where I can speak about our program, try to sell my shows as well, like Deborah Tuberville. That would be great to bring that exhibition in North America, and I would really hope one day that we can even have this show in New York, because she was a New Yorker. And this is, promoting, but also thinking together about future projects.
Yes.
So meeting people, it's all this networking that where we can invent projects like during a lunch. And that's also what I love about the work, because I can imagine if tomorrow I have lunch with an artist and we want to work together, maybe in 3 years from now there will be an exhibition or there will be a book, and all that happens because you meet people and suddenly you try to dream together and you have this dialogue and suddenly you have a project together. But sometimes it's just a nice meeting. You keep this idea somewhere, and I have tons of ideas, sleeping in my on my desk. And maybe in 2 years from now, I will think, this artist may fit in this group show. And that would be great to include his work or her work in this group show. So sometimes it's also this way of, of following up with people.
No, that's great. And I think this segues into my next topic, which I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're also a writer and you've written many great books. And I wanted to kind of ask you, how does the idea come for these books that you've published? And you've published books that cover so many artists, like the book Dictionary of Photography, and then Body, the photograph book, which includes a lot of artists. So how do you sit down and think about these projects and what you want to write about and what you think the world essentially needs that it doesn't currently have?
Well, that's a good question. That's also, something we discussed together with publishing houses. Some projects are perfect as books. Some projects are very good as exhibitions and books. And it's true that it's also linked to the market and how publishing houses can, navigate in that. Sometimes I have ideas that would, for me, be great books, but the publishing house says, but who will pay for that? Who will buy it? Is it an exhibition? I say, no, it's not an exhibition. Oh, well, it's difficult, because if it's an exhibition for publishing houses, it's very good because they know that they have first the visitors.
Yes.
So they would say, okay, if it's an exhibition, then we know that we can sell books. And if it's a traveling exhibition, it's even better.
Oh, yes.
Because they know that eventually this book will be bought by several museums. So it's we forget about this aspect because we think, oh, it's great, I have an idea for a book and then I can just write it. But you have to first start looking at the interest outside, and does it work for the outside world? Who will buy it? And sometimes I also made projects, publication that nobody bought, and I couldn't find any money for that. So I mean, it's also part of what you have to learn, and at the end, it's still a lot of work to because I really want the books that are beautifully designed and beautiful. They should be beautiful objects, and when people buy them. And also what I love with books, and I have a passion for art books, is that you can not have the money to buy arts and have a collection in your house or on your walls, but books, you can have the entire history of art in books, and everyone can buy a book. I mean, books, you can have a book for $10 or you can have a beautiful books for $1,000, but I mean, most of the books are under $100, so it's something that you can still buy. So for me it's a way to reach other people. Working in an exhibition, it means that geographically you have to go.
Yes.
And take time in your day. A book, you can reach people that are all over the world. You can order your book. You can, and you have bookshops. Still, some bookshops propose book that maybe are from another part of the world. And the book also, why for me it's very important, is books. They are not linked to a time. You can keep them. You can, the other day I bought a book that was published in 2004. So. And it was an exhibition at that time, and I didn't see the exhibition. I knew about the book, and I bought it last week. So in a way, 20 years later, I can still have a lot of, interest in going through this book, and the book and this project exists 20 years later. So that's also, the magic of books. But my books, I try to always have a publishing house. So it means you have to convince people, so sell your projects to publishers. And then you have to sell your project to artists. Because if you mentioned the body book, it includes, I don't remember how many artists, but maybe 100 artists are included in that book. So then I may have, the project and try to make my list of works and artists I want to represent, but then they have to agree to be reproduced and be part of that book in this context. So it's like any shows. At what point when you reach out people, you have to explain the context, how they are going to be shown. First of all, I also always start with a specific work, and I say, this is what I discovered. But then I ask, now you understand my perspective. Do you have maybe something else to suggest? And then I have this exchange with artists, which is great. And then you have also to go with what is available. And then you have the money coming. The money question is also important. Some artists will say, okay, you can have the work. It will cost you, in terms of so much money. But if you have a book with 200 artists, then your budget, you realize that, okay, this money I can give to this artist, but what about if the other 200 ask the same money?
Right.
Then it's not feasible. So then you negotiate, or you sometimes, it happened to me to say, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to include you in the book because it's not possible that we put so much money just for one image.
Right.
So it's, many different questions in that sense. But I love having these collective projects because it's a way for me, very healthy way of thinking also. When you have a book, you have to, it's, in a show it's similar, but in a book you know that it stays. Forever. And you can have no electricity at home, shut down, and you can still have the book. So in that sense, somehow I know that you have to think a bit differently over time. And then usually publishers, they want text, essays to accompany these books. So writing is also a way in my mind to really think and focus about but why it's important. Sometimes, because I'm a curator, I always start with works. And I have an idea, but then I start to put together artists or works. But it doesn't mean that in my mind, I know exactly in terms of conceptual or theoretical, I know exactly why I put that together. But there's a kind of visual sense I put together and I have an idea. But when you have to write, you have to clarify really that. And I realized that for me, writing, during the writing process, suddenly I have this tick, 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 tick in my mind coming together, and I realize that, okay, now I understand better why I put that
yourself
myself. So it's a kind of process, and then I think a lot about, but before writing. I'm a kind of slow in writing, and I realized that I first think a lot what I want to say, and then suddenly I can write it. But it's a kind of different thing in your mind, also building a book or building an exhibition in that sense.
Right, and so much research also goes into it.
Absolutely, but research is when you study art at university, this is maybe the part that I was able to learn when I was a student. It's researching, going everywhere. At my time, it's kind of before internet somehow. It was the starting of internet, but I think that most of my research at university were in books, mostly in books. And it's true today, it's mostly online. But you're right, research is part of something that, I learned at university. But my daily job, I realized the gap between what I learned at school and what is my daily life today. This research part, which I really enjoy, it's tiny, tiny, tiny part of my life.
So this is the perfect segue now to kind of backtrack a little bit. I wanted to ask you where you studied, if you got undergrad or graduate degrees, and like you mentioned, how your studies ended up playing into your overall career. How much of it did you actually use or didn't use?
Well, it's because today sometimes I have this question and I'm trying to think what is the link between my studies and my job today. And it's funny because I realized that it's like unconscious, that they were things like seeds that were planted at that time during my studies, during the research I made during my studies, that are still they are still happening today. They are still growing today. So in that sense, I really believe that my studies brought a lot. They opened my mind. Absolutely.
Did you study photography?
No, I studied art. But before that, first of all, I was very much interested in literature, cinema, art, and all the cultural things. And I was very much interested in languages. Being in Europe, it means that you are exposed to many different cultures, many different languages, and Switzerland, we have, it's a kind of very, very small country, but we have German, Italian, French, even Romansh. It's a fourth language that nobody speaks, 200 people maybe, but still a national language. But it means that Switzerland, it's a kind of mix of different cultures as well and languages. And when I was young, when I was a teenager, I was thinking, first of all, I wanted to learn languages. That was first my idea. To think about the future, I was thinking, maybe translator. So this was, and then the mix of interest in culture, literature, theater, cinema, and of course, art. And I realized today that this interest I had, this is exactly what I live. It's like, working on an international level with people from different backgrounds, different languages, different countries. And photography, it's about life, it's about society, but it's also about art and culture. So I realized that it comes together. It is really kind of result of something. I had this interest when I was a teenager. And then I was thinking, to make a living, I'm not going to work in art because I had this interest in art, and my family, we visited many museums. I remember with my grandma, I would go every weekend in, visiting a show in a museum, quite classical, like paintings. But I have my aunt, she's a painter. My stepfather was a sculptor. My aunt, at what point she had a gallery, contemporary art gallery. So I remember being like 5 years old, being at these openings and playing around, and it was kind of normal life for me to see an opening and all these artists together. So it was part of my life, but I was thinking I'm not an artist. First of all, I was thinking if I'm in art, it means being an artist. And I could see my aunt, and I'm very close to her. And for me, it was, no, I'm not like her. I'm not an artist. I'm not going to paint or... And then I was thinking, so I cannot make a life in art. So it was always in my mind like a hobby, a kind of side things. So that's why I was thinking, oh, maybe being a translator, that's something that I can make a living with. So that was my first idea. So that's why I started to study. First, in teenager years, it was Spanish. I was thinking, oh, Spanish means South America, tons of countries, so it will give me work. I never used Spanish in my life. It's funny, and then when I was a teenager, that was also when I finished high school. It was perestroika, you know, when suddenly Eastern Europe, the communist bloc just fell down. Yeah. And being in Europe, I remember when the Berlin Wall fell. I was very young, and I went straight to Berlin, and it was like, wow, that's amazing. And suddenly, being in Europe, you see there's a kind of new world opening, and it was possible to travel in these countries. So I had this interest of adding languages, and it was more in that direction of the East. And it's also linked to my history, personal history, because my family, my grandfather was originally from Poland.
Oh, I'm Polish too.
Okay, so I wanted to study Polish, and I was thinking that will be my link to, you know, this region. And in Switzerland, if you want to study Polish, you have to study Russian.
Oh, yeah.
At that time. And so I went to Zurich University to study Polish, and they said first Russian. So I said, okay, well, Russian. But it was at time of, you know, when Russia was really opening up. So I was, maybe it's interesting. So I started to read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Pushkin, and all these writers.
The classics, yes.
The classics. And it was funny because I love that, you know. I love the literature, and I also always loved the 1920s in art, and I loved Malevich, I loved Rodchenko, Tatlin, and these were, and I was thinking, oh, that's something that could really fit my interest. So I started to study Russian, thinking that I will eventually go to Polish. And I was thinking, okay, I have in Switzerland German, English, French, so it's good to add languages, and then I will be a translator. And I never studied Polish because Russian was so difficult to learn, and it's quite different from Polish. Yes. So then I was thinking, oh, it's enough. I'm going to just focus on that. And I had this interest of, you know, Russian literature and Russian art. And I was thinking, oh, maybe I should mix this language idea with history of art. And I wanted to do a thesis about Tatlin. And it also goes with my interest in history. I also studied history, and I was thinking, oh, the 1920s, it was a world building kind of, you know, an amazing time. So I was thinking, oh, that's fascinating, which is interesting to just as an anecdote, that people at that time that studied Russian and started earlier than me, they all studied Russian for political reasons. Being communist.
Yeah, makes
so
sense.
when I met them, and I was in the first year and they were in the fifth year, I was like, what? Political reasons? I have no interest in politics, and I have no interest in communists, you know. So for me, it was really funny because I was completely there for another reason. But most of my friends studying with me, that's the same. It was, you know, a time where Europe was opening up, and we were thinking we can travel in Eastern Europe, and that's what I did also when I was 20, going by train to Czechoslovakia, Poland. I went to Russia, of course, and East Germany, Berlin. Berlin was completely amazing at that time. So but more and more I was thinking, this Russian language is much too difficult. And I was thinking, I'm not going to be a translator. I don't have the skills really to do that. It's too much work. And I could see that my interest was more like history of art. So just all that to say that I have a master degree in history of art. My second was Russian. And today I completely forgot about that, but I don't use Russian in my professional life. But in a way, being open to culture, to literature, to other arts, and not just paintings, was something that was important for me. And at the very end, when I had to do my dissertation, my master degree, I remember that I had to come with an idea about, this research. And suddenly I was a bit afraid of being just about history. And this idea of paintings, because in Switzerland it was quite classical, the studies. And I was thinking, it's a bit boring to just study old art, and it was, even if it's 20th century, for me it was kind of ancient. And talking to people, thinking about that, suddenly someone told me what about photography or design? And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to see if this topic there, but I had to convince university to go into photography because it wasn't part of what they used to do. So in my university, I was one of the first students really focusing on photography. I knew nothing about it, but somehow photography for me was contemporary, much more, than old paintings. And this is also, and then I was triggered and I was thinking, that's also good that nobody really is in this topic. So and that's how I suddenly at the very end of my study, so when I say I'm an art historian, it's not like I was really specialized in photography during my study, but the very last year I really dig into photography, and I realized that what I learned at that time for my dissertation and master thesis, I realized that this is the way I discovered photography, and it opened all the doors. So in a way, it was a good move.
Yeah, it was that aha moment.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. So you've now graduated in art history, and you've studied photography. What kind of led you on the path after school that you're on now?
Well, it's true that, because I said, what kind of job we can do when you study art. And I was thinking, being in a museum, it's a bit maybe boring. It's being a collection and also in Switzerland, I realized that these jobs were not really open. I mean, when someone had a job working in a collection, she would stay there for 30 years. We didn't really discuss at that time about communication, education. These were not classical jobs in museum. Being in a museum means being a collection person. And I didn't know anything about how you curate shows or how you work in exhibition. But there was this photography museum where I asked if I could do an internship. I knew a photographer. It's funny because this photographer, Swiss photographer, her name is Monique Jabko. She's 90 years old today. And I realized that she knew the director at the time of the photography museum, Musée de l'Elysée, where I am today. And she called him and she said, well, I have this young lady and she's nice, and can you have her as an intern? And I went there, and I discovered during this internship that there are many different jobs in museum. I had no idea, and university didn't tell me about that. They just mentioned being in a collection and researching. and I had no idea that all these different jobs people do, and that was a time where communication and education were not really, they were a little bit there, but they were not specific department. They were not people, professional people with these skills.
Yeah.
So suddenly going there, of course, because I was an art historian, it was first going into the collection. And they gave me work to do, to research and then database and, do this kind of daily thing. But then they said, we have a job maybe for you because we are going to have a big show coming and we need help for research. So then after internship, I got a first kind of job for 6 months. And they said, you are going to help us to work on that show. And it was a show about 150 years in photography.
Wow.
So that was great for me to just start to look into that. And this is how I discovered that, to organize an exhibition, you need loans, you need research, you need to ask other museums or collectors how they can lend you the works. So it means organizing all that. It means transport, insurance. It means writing, exhibition texts and all that. And with this project, during these 6 months, suddenly I went all over this. And in the museum, there was this new director, Bill Ewing, who just arrived. And he's Canadian, but he started his career in New York. So he wasn't Swiss, and he was very international. And he curated tons and tons of projects before being the director of the Musée de l'Élysée. And I knew nothing. And I had to work directly with him because he needed a kind of assistant. And I keep saying that. I mean, Bill Ewing is my mentor. We then worked together for 12 years. We curated together tons of projects. We also wrote books together, and he shared me his network. So during all these years, starting, first as an intern, and then I had this first project. And after these 6 months, he said, "Oh, maybe I have another project, another 6 months." And then it was another 2 years. And and I was still in this same museum, and suddenly there was this open position in the exhibition department, and they said, "Oh, because you are here, we can give you this more position." And after all these years, suddenly I was the head of the exhibition department.
Yeah.
So I learned all that, with him. We were really a good team. We still talk today, every day. Is 80 today, and I realized that with him and his way of thinking international, he's an anthropologist, so he had a complete different way of thinking about art than us historians.
Of course.
It's completely different. So he opened my mind, because at what point we were researching a project, and he said, go to the pharmacy and ask them if they have advertisements with images that we could bring in the exhibition. I was like, in a pharmacy? Why would I do that? And because he's an anthropologist, he had this wide interest in images, and we borrowed things from the pharmacy, but we bought postcards in the street, and we had magazines in exhibition. And I realized that working in photography, it's much wider than having a beautiful collection prints from a museum or collector on the wall. It's much more than that. So, and that's why I say he's my mentor. I think he opened my eyes, and being not too much historian and too much classical, too much museum, and to really, look wide. And of course, he had a career in New York. He was, before being in Switzerland, he was in London for several years. So his network was very wide. and I traveled a lot with him, and he was really crucial in my way of understanding what the work is.
That's an incredible journey to be, you really got to see how an exhibition functions from start to finish.
Absolutely.
So that was an incredible opportunity. And then I know you also moved on to be the curator at FEP Foundation, and then the director of Photography Festival, and then the director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Le Locle in Switzerland, where you were, I think, for 8 years. I don't think we have enough time to cover everything, but could you just maybe tell me, I don't know, your most informative experiences there?
Well, after Bill Ewing had to retire, because in Switzerland, when you work in a public museum at 65, it's like away. You have to leave. That's retirement. So, and we had such a good time working together. I was thinking, okay, I'm there for a long time now. Like, it's I started 12 years ago. So, and I was quite young. So I was thinking I should go out in the world and see something else. So I resigned. I wrote my letter saying I'm going to leave the museum when he will retire. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking I should really push myself to go out. It was a great position. I could stay there for sure. But I was thinking before having a new director coming in, being involved in new projects, it's better just to announce that I'm going to leave. So but I had no job.
Wow. So you were really risking everything.
So I was thinking, but I had this network. I was thinking I have a great network, and he said that he would retire from the museum, but he wouldn't retire from the work.
Right.
So we said that maybe we can still work together, and he learned me how to reach people everywhere in the world and to just invent projects. So this is what happened. I started to go out in the world and say, I can be a curator, and I invented the project. And this is how I started to first work on international shows and with FEP, the Foundation for the Exhibition of Photography. I met the director, Todd Brando, while I was at the Musée de l'Elysée. So and we worked together there, on a project. And then I told him, I can curate other shows for you. Because the foundation, the FEP, they travel exhibitions all over the world in photography, and that was, something I could do. So I did this project that was very important for me on fashion photography, history of fashion photography through the Condé Nast archive. So I came to New York, dig in the archives here because, Condé Nast is 1 million images or more, or I guess more maybe. And then I was able to open boxes and then I curated that show that went to 15 museums all over the world.
Wow.
Because FEP produced the exhibition, and the strength of FEP is really to travel shows. So that was also for me another education to really, first of all, work as a curator, but then also to travel that show. And I was involved in all the installations. So I went to Australia, to Mexico, Edinburgh, Berlin, to always install my show and work with all these different teams. And for me, it was very interesting to have these opportunities to see how it works in other museums. So I was always a curator coming with an exhibition, but I had to deal with exhibitions department, communication departments, education department in China, in Australia, in Mexico. So that was a great education.
That's incredible.
And at the same time, in Switzerland, there was this very small festival, photography festival, in a kind of very remote village in the Alps. And the founder of this festival, they were looking for someone in photography. They had the project, but they didn't know how to do it. They are not curators, but they had the project that they were thinking, we can have a cultural project, a small, and they thought about photography because they said photography is not fragile. We can print It's outdoor because there's no museum. And this is this small festival at plus 1,000. And I was the director of this festival. It wasn't a full-time project for me, but it was another project I could do as a freelance. And that was also a great education for me because coming from the museum world, with this festival, I had to adapt to work outdoor and to work also. We would go into small chalets and houses and ask people if they could give us a room where we could have a tiny show during this festival. And so I had to adapt to these different spaces and to work in communication, also to communicate about a thing that is not a museum.
Yeah.
Working for a festival. So it was a great education and tons of new ways of thinking about photography, about art, and also about my work as a curator, being this director of the festival. And I really enjoyed it. It was a biennial, so it was also a nice rhythm. And people really enjoyed the festival because it's in these beautiful Swiss postcards in the Alps, beautiful blue sky mountains and cows and, a kind of crazy.
Switzerland is unreal.
Okay. That was exactly
Yes.
this landscape in summer. So it was a great project. But at the same time, I was thinking, working in a museum, it would be nice. And there was this position open in a Musée des Beaux-Arts, Museum of Fine Arts, Le Locle. Museum of Fine Arts, not photography. And I was thinking, it would be being a freelance for several years. You still need to look for money and make a living. And I was thinking, and I'm the mother of 2 children, so I was thinking, still need to make sure that I can make a living. And it's super nice to work being a freelance, but you have the daily also invoices.
Yes, responsibilities.
Responsibilities, and you have to pay your rent and your food and for your children. So I was thinking, it would be maybe wise for me to apply to that job and see. It's Museum of Fine Arts. I'm an art historian. By the way, I can maybe go back to, kind of classical art. And I got the job. And I told them, but my passion is in photography. And they said, you are the director, you decide about your program.
There you go.
So it was great. I curated shows. I brought shows in photography, but not only. It was also nice for me to go back to, other practices, painting, sculptures, installations, video art. But it was another education to be in this museum because this museum was a small museum in also a remote place in Switzerland. It's in a small town. In Switzerland, we have museums everywhere. It's a town, Le Locle, between Geneva and Basel, but really kind of in the countryside. And I was a bit naive and I was thinking, okay, I know how to work in a museum. So I knew that part of the job. I had a very small team, but it was fine because I know how to curate shows. And with my network, I knew how to call people and be able to have a nice program. But I realized, now I have to work on communication because there were no visitors going there.
Wow.
And I was a bit... I didn't ask who are the visitors. And they said, local people a little bit. But when I saw the figures, I was like, there's no one there. So I decided, and it was education again. I decided, okay, I have to put that museum on the map. So I had to think my program that should be attractive, and I had to communicate a lot. And because of my network and then I had to call journalists all the time and they said, it's a bit far, countryside, we don't want to come. And I had to insist. And then to make sure that they would come, I had to give a very high quality program. So that's why, and you mentioned in the introduction that I had Andy Warhol, Stanley Kubrick, Henri Cartier-Bresson. So I needed names to make sure that journalists would come.
That they recognize.
That they would recognize. So they would do this kind of 2 hours, 1 hour trip to go there because you have to go there. You are not there. You have to, take the train or your car. And then I needed something very attractive also for visitors. So it was another education in, thinking about how a museum can address an interesting program, be attractive. Of course, I had the locals, but I wanted, in my mind, I wanted it being a national thing, and also why not an international place. So, and I was not afraid. I was thinking, I have nothing to lose. We are in Switzerland. I can call people. They said, but where is this museum? I said, no, it's not Basel. People know Art Basel. I said, no, it's remote, but you will see it's beautiful, a small place. But we are in Switzerland. And I realized that the Swiss side was very attractive. So I was able to convince the Museum of the City of New York to bring the Stanley Kubrick show they curated a couple of years earlier to that remote museum in Switzerland, because I had the international network and I had the Swiss card. And I said, it's Switzerland. It's very good Switzerland. And we are not so far from Basel.
Yeah, we're just close enough.
So that's how so again, it was another experience in my career that helped me to understand what is a museum, how we communicate, how we reach visitors. And I think all of these different experiences helped me for my work today.
It's incredible. And I love smaller museums in like the middle of nowhere. I feel like the experience there is so different than you would get like at MoMA or like museums in the center of the city that are often so overcrowded and you can't really enjoy everything, that's on view.
But also what is good in small museum, and I can say that, is you have to do a little bit of everything.
Yes.
You have a small team. So you cannot just be in one thing. Even if you work in a collection, you have to work a little bit in education. You have to work a little bit in technique. Then you have to open your skills.
Yes.
Being in a small museum, which is, I would say that's the best way to learn the work.
Oh, 100%.
Working in a small museum.
100%, because like you just mentioned, at that point you get skills in every single department and you know how a museum functions. So when you go to a big museum, you know exactly what you need and where.
Yeah, and then in a big museum, and I'm now in a big museum, I realized when I talk to the education department or the communication department, they only think that for that department. And they don't have the overview they have the overview, they know about what the others do, but they are not involved in that sense.
Yeah.
And I really think that, it's a better education being in a small museum.
Yeah. And I think, now as the role of director, I think that was critical for you because you understand everything now.
I had to go over all the work that as what we do in museum, and I had to understand the technique. I had to understand the reception desk.
Yes.
I had to understand the coffee, also think about, because I had to we had a small coffee place, and I had to be involved in all these discussions and to be really part of it and work on that. So in that sense, it was the best education. Yeah.
So then after that, and I think you curated or had in the programming about 100 exhibitions over 8 years. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, because the museum was small town, but quite big. It was a museum founded in the 19th century. And we had a beautiful old house, but several floors, 4 floors. So quite big. And I realized that to fill the house with just one show, it's a bit difficult. So during these 8 years, there were, I guess, maybe 1 or twice where we had just one show and it was on every single floor. Also, we had a collection, paintings, mostly local painters, Swiss painters, or really painters from the region. And they told me when I was hired that I could just have half of the museum with a permanent collection and just use the rest for temporary shows. But because I'm a curator, I was thinking, maybe. So I started with this permanent collection. And then after 6 months, I said, okay, now we need the rooms.
Yes.
And we can play with temporary shows. So it was a bit crazy, but that's how I started to really fill the room with different shows. So usually we had a show on 2 floors, and it means that I had 2 other floors I had to fill with other shows. So, of course, 8 years, 100 shows, that's reality, because some of these shows were very small, some were large, but it's always the same thing you have to do. You start from the scratch, and then you have an opening, and if it's a very small show or a big show, you still have the same work to do.
Yeah.
So all together, and sometimes we had 3 shows at the same time, 4 shows at the same time, or 2 shows at the same time. So all together, it comes to 100 shows. But for me, it was also important to have all these temporary shows, because as I said, we had to communicate to the people come to visit us. So you have to make the trip to us. So I was thinking, I cannot give them just a show that they visit in 20 minutes. Because then you have 2 hours by car or by train for 20 minutes. Yeah. It won't work. So I needed to offer more to see. So also that's why I was really, maybe programming so many different things, is I wanted to make sure that, okay, they have maybe different shows at the same time, so they can spend a little bit more than 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's actually great thinking, because no one wants to travel 5 hours, spend 20 minutes, and then leave again.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that was why I had to curate so many shows and be also being attractive with big names.
Yeah. So then after that, you then went to your current position. So I think now we've come full circle, and I wanted to kind of ask you just your last thoughts on any advice that you might give to women in the arts who might want to follow a similar trajectory, or who are working in Switzerland and, want to work at a museum.
Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't discuss about this idea of being a woman in that field. And somehow, things are quite different today, but when I started in the late 1990s, I realized that most of the directors at that time were men.
Yep.
And in museum, there are always many women working, and they work in administration, at the reception, education, communication. But when I really started my career, the minute I was in touch with directors, or I was with a male director and we visited other directors, they were all men. Mm-hmm. And for me, I realized that there was a kind of gap. I was much younger. They were all older generation, when you are in this position, and they were all male. And I realized very recently that things have changed. Most of my time now, I talk to other women, which is very nice. Mm-hmm. So it's very different kind of, relationship. There are many more women that are now having director positions. And of course, in the museum world, there are still many women working. But I realized that I had to fight more to get to that position as a woman. And Switzerland, now we have many female directors in museums in Switzerland, but I realized it wasn't the case 10 years ago. And I realized also that being a woman changed your perspective on the way you work, the relationship you have with your teams. I have an experience. I had to install a show in China 15 years ago. And they were all guys when I came to the room and, happy to install the show. And when they saw me, they were really embarrassed. And they didn't want to hear from me, being a woman, what they had to do. So I had in my professional life sometimes these experiences of being younger than others, being a woman, that were quite tricky. So you have to speak loud, and I'm not that kind of person. So it was also another way of thinking how you can navigate and, have your role and be respected. And I could feel that it wasn't always easy. And the other thing that I have to say, being a female curator, I realized, not in my early years, but maybe again 10 years ago, that most of my shows was with male artists.
Interesting.
And my interactions with artists were only with men. So suddenly I realized it doesn't work. Where are the women?
Yeah.
And I think this is because I'm a woman. I suddenly became sensitive. So today we talk a lot about women artists. We have to dedicate shows to women artists. It's really important. Also, when you look at the art market, in the galleries, having more women. And I realize, and this is something that I try to bring as a professional, is being in a museum, I can help women artists in that sense. And because we know that in museum, when we have shows with artists, it helps them for the,
of course,
galleries, sales and all that. So I realized that I have to make sure that I have women artists in my exhibitions. And I pay attention to that. But I also realize that it's much easier to go just with male artists. And that's something that was shocking for me to realize, because if I don't pay attention, if I start to think about my program and I put names on, a list, just, again, men. And I have to think differently, a little bit less today, but I have to pay attention and to make sure that when I have a group show, it's more a mix. When I do a book, first of all, my first book, I didn't make a count. I didn't check how many women I would have in the book and how many men. And this is a kind of new thing in my life now, to just make sure that when I did this body book a couple of years ago, at the end of my research, it wasn't part of my research per se, but at the end, when I established my list, I made a count. And I think it's very important to just double check, because when I made a count, sometimes 20%, not more. So you have to really go back to your research and make sure that you have enough women. And I also had some of my program just with women artists. I decided that it was important. And why I did that? Because when I showed these women, I realized that they were amazing, fantastic work. Some of them I never heard about them before, and I was like, being an art historian, being in that field, why I don't know them, why I don't see them in galleries, why I don't see them in other collections. So it was a kind of shock for me when I really when you start to study, you realize, but the quality is so evident.
Yes.
So why the career is not better? So that was a lesson. And then the other lesson, that because I love being a curator, talk to artists, I realized that I had people calling me and asking me shows or sending me books and sending me portfolios, but they were mostly men. So why I don't get that from other women?
Right.
And sometimes I would call a woman, I would say, well, I'm interested in your work, and we meet. And the response I get was, okay, when do you want? But they were a little bit shy.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I don't push them, I would never have them in shows. So that was another lesson, to see that I had to do the research myself. I had to call them. I had to tell them, yes, you can come. Yes, you can send me your work. And I had to push them a little bit. But you never need this discussion with men.
No, not
never.
at all.
that's also something I want to tell today, that being in that position, being a woman, means also that you can not change the world, but you can, play a role in the art world and helping female artists, because museums are really respected. I know that being in my position, having my program in the museum or having books, this is a way for me also to help artists, but female artists, they need more help, I would say, still. So, Of course, I mentioned in the beginning Cindy Sherman. She had, this recognition. But how many Cindy Sherman we have out there in the world? Not so many.
No.
And if you look at, the figures in the art market, it's mostly, the prices are mostly for men. And I had, discussions with collectors telling me a couple of years ago, still telling me, well, I prefer to buy a male artist because I know if I want to sell, it will be better, easier. I think today it's a bit different. But what I said at that time, he said, well, you should maybe consider buying female artists because the price would be better today, and that can only go up.
Exactly.
So, but I remember having these discussions like 10 years ago, and for sure things have changed. It's much better today, but I'm also a little bit not so optimistic, thinking that we should continue to pay attention. We don't want to be lazy about that or think that everything is resolved for women artists. I think we live in a time now where we see a lot of shows and we see women artists in galleries, and these women can really have better career. But let's keep paying attention, because I think it can really be fast where suddenly we forget to pay attention and we go back to another kind of perspective. So this is something I want to really say. That's something I say to my team, and the museum, Photo Elysée, has in the past. The previous director also had this kind of view on female artists, and I think it's quite important to continue that work and to say it loud.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that you consciously think about these things, because as you said, I think we've made progress, but I don't think we're at a place yet where we can say everything is equal and everything is great. And I think we still have to continue having these conversations and thinking about them, because of course it's easy for directors to put on blockbuster shows with recognizable names, which are usually by male artists, and it's harder to put on these, amazing shows with women, like you said, who might be a little bit shyer as artists, who won't come forward. And, like you said, the art market is still not level. Even at auctions today, the major sales are by male artists, and the price points are way higher for male artists than they are for female artists.
Much higher.
Yeah.
Much higher. And it's true that working in a museum, something I say a lot is like, we are not foreigner to this art market. Of course, we are not we don't have the same role, but we are part of that world, and I know that when we program artists, it has an influence on the sales. It may change things for them, and we have, in a way, we can play a positive role for women in that sense.
Yes.
But we have to continue the work, and it's not equal. A couple of years ago, I was invited by Paris Photo, that's a photography fair in Paris. And they started a program that I really, really loved. It's a parcours. They ask female curators to go through galleries and to pick only female artists and to propose that to the visitors. So they put visibility on these artists, but only female artists. And I was invited a couple of years ago to do that. And I was, okay, so send me the list of all the participating galleries and the work they show, and I will pick works. And I realized that it wasn't all galleries that I could pick works. And there were some galleries I know, but there were not one female artist in the booth. So it was, and then they started to check. And when the program started 5 years ago, it was 20% of female artists in the fair, only 20%.
Wow.
And today I think it's over 30%, but it's not 50%.
Exactly. It's not equal yet.
It's not equal yet. And I realized that because they promoted this program, they gave this visibility to these artists, it was also a way for them to say to galleries, don't forget to bring women artists on your booth.
Great.
So I think that galleries today, they start to make this effort, but Paris Photo, the last figure was, I think, 33%, not 50%. So I think we should continue talking about that.
Yes, we still have some work to do. I think that wraps up our interview. But if there's anything else that you want to say before we finish.
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, we covered everything. We actually had some great topics that we discussed, so I'm very happy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. And then to my audience who's listening, please check out the shows that we mentioned that are coming up that Nathalie worked on. And I will see you on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.